Montana Territory, August 1877. The wind was dry and hot, dust curling across the sun-baked dirt road outside the Whitlow homestead. Inside, a plate shattered on the kitchen floor. Della Kersey froze. Her hands shook. She had not meant to drop it, it slipped. Simple as that, but she knew the sound would carry. Heavy boots thudded across the floor above her. She scrambled to pick up the broken pieces, cutting her palm in the rush to pretend nothing had happened. The cellar door slammed open. "You worthless girl," came Jed Whitlow's voice, thick with anger and whiskey. "That was my mother's plate." "I am sorry," Della whispered, pressing her bleeding hand against her apron. His belt came off before she could move. Later, when her lip was split and her back welted, she sat on the edge of the porch, blinking through the sunset. Her cheek throbbed. Blood dried stiff on her sleeve. She heard the soft cries of her two little ones from the loft, where Jed had locked them. Vera was 6. Vincent was 4. Della had no idea if they had eaten today. She had come to Jed Whitlow's house 3 years ago after her husband was killed in a cattle stampede in Texas. She was 21 then, desperate, with 2 children and no money. Jed said he would help. He lied. Now she was 24 and help had not come, until that night. A horse clopped up the road just after the sun dipped below the ridge. Della did not move. She figured it was another drunk ranch hand or a neighbor Jed owed money to. But the boots that hit the dirt were too clean. The man who stepped into the yard was tall, with dark blonde hair tied back, wearing a clean shirt and a holstered Colt. His eyes scanned the place like he already knew what he was looking for. "Anyone home?" he called, voice even. Jed stumbled out, half drunk, half mad. "Who the hell are you?" "Name's Xander Nash," the man said, his voice low. "I'm here for a horse. Heard you got one for sale. Chestnut mare, 5 years old." Jed squinted. "Maybe I do, maybe I do not." Xander's eyes shifted. They landed on Della. He looked at her bruised face, the blood on her hand, the way she held herself like one more touch would crack her wide open. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked her directly. Jed stepped in front of her. "She is fine." Xander did not flinch. "I asked her." Della did not speak. She just looked up at him, really looked, the way he stood, the way his voice stayed calm. Something about him was steady, like a river that did not rise when it rained. Jed laughed like a man who thought he had already won. "You want the horse or not?" Xander's eyes flicked back to him. "No. I want her." There was a silence so sharp it could have cut glass. Jed's face twisted. "You think you can just ride up here and I saw the welts on her arms, the blood. I heard the crying from the loft. You whipped her for dropping a plate." Xander's voice never rose. "That ain't a wife. That's a prisoner." Jed reached for the rifle near the door. Xander was faster. The shot cracked through the air. Jed's hat flew off, a clean hole through the brim. He froze. "You are going to unlock that loft," Xander said quietly. "You are going to let those children out and you are going to step the hell aside." Jed, white-faced now, did what he was told. The door creaked open and 2 small figures scrambled down, barefoot and scared. Vera ran to Della, throwing her arms around her waist. Vincent clung to her skirt. Della's eyes filled, but she held it in. She looked at Xander. "Why?" He shrugged once. "Because no woman should be whipped for dropping a plate." Della stared at him. "And because if you come with me," he said, softer now, "you will only carry peace in my house." Her throat worked, but no words came. Xander held out his hand. She took it. They left Jed Whitlow standing in the dirt, blinking against the dust as the mare carried the 4 of them away: Della, Vera, Vincent, and the quiet man who had walked into her life like he had been sent there. They rode until the sky turned navy and the stars came out. An old cabin lay tucked in a quiet glen near the Judith River. Xander's place. Small, but clean. There was a garden, a barn and a dry well with fresh water. He helped Della down gently, then lifted the children like they weighed nothing. He showed them the bed, the kitchen, the blankets. He did not ask for anything, not one thing. Later, as the children slept curled on the cot, Della stepped outside. Xander was feeding the horses. She watched him for a long time. "You do not know me," she said. He looked at her, his gaze steady. "I know you needed someone. I do not have anything to give. You gave your children safety, that is enough." She took a breath. "I am not used to quiet, you will be." She looked down at her hands. "I dropped a plate." He walked over, slow and calm. He reached out and touched her cheek just once. "I do not care about plates," he said. "I care that you can breathe." Her eyes filled again, but she did not cry. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you." He nodded once. "You are safe now, Della." She believed him, for the first time in years. And when she climbed into that warm bed beside her babies in the cabin that smelled of cedar and fresh bread, she did not flinch at the creak of the door. She did not dream of belts, only of horses and rivers and a man who looked at her like she was not broken. Not anymore. By the third morning, Della had learned the rhythm of the place. A coyote called downriver just before dawn. Xander rose without sound, his boots never waking the children. He left a tin of water warming on the stove before heading out. Della heard the barn door groan open, the quiet thud of hooves being led to pasture, and sometimes the low murmur of his voice to the animals, gentle, without demand. She stood barefoot in the doorway, arms tucked around her waist, watching the sky change behind the cottonwoods. Vera and Vincent still slept, side by side beneath a quilt that smelled faintly of tobacco and lye soap. She had not asked him where he came from. He had not asked what she had done to end up in a place like Jed's. It was the silence between them that surprised her most, not tense, not fearful, just wide and clean, like space that hadn't been filled yet. That morning, he returned with a bushel of wild onions and a fresh clutch of eggs from the coop. He placed them carefully on the table, then poured her a cup of coffee from the pot he'd left simmering. "You cook?" he asked, not unkindly, just curious. "I can," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Not fancy." "Don't need fancy," he said. "Just honest." She did not answer right away. Then, "I'm not used to people being careful with their words." He met her gaze. "I wasn't raised to throw him around." Vera wandered in, hair mussed, dragging one of Xander's old socks like a doll. She climbed into a chair and looked at the eggs with suspicion. "Are these the kind that crack red?" she asked. Della reached for the skillet. "These are the kind that cook up gold." Xander chuckled, low in his throat. "That's a fine kind." Later, after the sun had cleared the ridge, he asked if she wanted to walk the boundary fence with him. She nodded. Vera stayed behind to teach Vincent how to peel onions with the back of a spoon, their small voices drifting through the open shutters. The trail ran through a narrow copse of spruce, then opened to a sloping field, thick with wild grass and yellowed thistle. Xander walked a pace ahead, holding the wire steady while Della twisted new ties with practiced hands. "You've done this before," he said. "My first husband taught me. He said if I could patch a shirt, I could mend a fence." That's true enough. They worked in companionable quiet until a broken post slowed them. Xander knelt, pressing his palm against the base, testing for rot. Della crouched beside him, brushing moss from the wood. "How long's this place been yours?" she asked. 6 years. Bought it off a miner who got tired of being cold." "You came out here alone," he nodded. "Left Missouri after my father died. Didn't want to be a clerk. Or a preacher." "What did your mother want you to be?" "Alive." She glanced at him. "Mine never said." The post shifted under his grip. He caught it, steadying it with both hands. Della braced it while he hammered in the new support. They worked without speaking, the rhythm of the task settling between them. When they reached the edge of the field, he paused, looking out over the grass toward the distant blue line of the mountains. "You planning to stay?" he asked, not looking at her. Della watched the wind ripple the grass. "I don't know what I'd be leaving for." "I don't take charity," he said. "I'm not offering it." He nodded like that settled something. They turned back, the sun high now, casting long shadows behind them. Back at the cabin, Vincent had fallen asleep on the porch steps with an onion clutched in one hand. Vera sat beside him, braiding a rope of grass. Della bent to lift her son, careful not to wake him. Xander leaned against the doorframe. "Children settle quick when they know they're safe." She tucked Vincent into the cot and whispered, "They've never known it before." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That night she stood outside again, arms crossed against the cooling air. He was near the barn, checking the hinges on the stall gate. "You don't ask much," she said. He straightened. "What would I ask for? Some men want to be owed." "I don't want anything you don't give freely." She walked closer. The moonlight caught the curve of her jaw, the bruises fading now to yellow. "I don't know what I have left to give," she said. He shook his head. "You're not here to make yourself smaller. You're here to be whole." She felt the truth of it settle deep in her chest. Not fast, not sudden. Just solid like stone in earth. "I still wake up afraid," she said. "Then I'll keep the night quiet," he replied. And he did. That night and the ones that followed. No heavy steps. No raised voices, just the hush of wind through the cottonwoods and the soft breath of her children asleep. By the week's end, she no longer flinched when a dish slipped in her hand. She only caught it, set it right, and kept cooking. The first rain came quiet and slow, a fine mist that softened the hard edges of August. It found its way into the seams of the cabin roof, the corners of the window panes, the wood grain of the porch rail where Della stood with a tin cup cooling in her hand. She watched the field shift in the gray light, the distant ridgeline swallowed by low clouds. Behind her, the children played with an old wooden cartwheel Xander had unearthed from the barn, their laughter muffled by the damp. Xander was out near the northern edge of the property, clearing a fallen pine that had come down in the last windstorm. He'd left before breakfast, rope and axe slung over his shoulder, and he hadn't come back in for the midday meal. Della had packed a small cloth bundle bread, smoked trout, and a wedge of cheese, and now she walked the path between the cabin and the timberline, the rain brushing cool across her cheeks. She found him kneeling beside the trunk, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, hands slick with sap and rain. He was wedging a stone beneath the cut to keep the blade from binding. "You forgot your food," she said, kneeling beside him. He looked up, then stood to stretch his back. "Didn't mean to be long." She handed him the bundle. "You always work like the land owes you something." He took it without answering, sitting on the trunk to eat quietly. She waited until he'd finished half the bread before speaking again. "You never told me what you did before you came west." He chewed slowly. "I traded mules along the Missouri River, carried goods between towns, slept in wagons, sometimes barns, mostly kept to myself." "Why?" He wiped his hands on a bit of cloth. "Saw too many men talk themselves into ruin." "I figured silence kept me standing." She nodded once, then reached for the axe and tested its weight. "You ever swing one of those?" he asked. "My father logged near the Sabine. He let me try once, said I hit like a preacher." Xander smiled at that, not mockery, just a quiet surprise. "Want another go at it?" She stepped closer to the pine and measured the cut, then planted her feet and brought the blade down. It bit shallow, but clean. "Better than a preacher," he said, stepping back to give her room. They worked the rest of the trunk together, trading the axe between them, breath steaming in the cooling rain. When the last section rolled free, Xander bound the pieces with rope and dragged them toward the cart path. Della followed at his shoulder, her hands raw and damp but her chest light. That evening the fire crackled low in the hearth, the children dozing one against the other on a braided rug. Della stood at the stove, stirring the last of the cornmeal into a pot of mush. Xander leaned against the threshold, arms crossed, watching her without urgency. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked without turning. "No, not even once." He stepped inside and set a tin cup on the table. "I left everything worth leaving. What's here now, this land, the quiet, you and the children, it's what I meant to find." She turned toward him, ladle still in hand. "It's not much of a life yet. It's the only one I've ever wanted." She didn't speak, but the silence between them changed, no longer the space of strangers, but something waiting to be filled. Later, after the children had been carried to bed and the fire banked low, she found him sitting on the porch, a blanket draped over his shoulders. She stepped outside, her shawl drawn close, and sat beside him without asking. He didn't look at her. "You don't need to stay awake on my account. I'm not tired." Rain had stopped, but the sky still hung heavy with it. She watched the clouds drift past the moon, soft and slow. "What do you want now?" he asked, his voice low. She thought on it, careful with the words. "I want the mornings to stay quiet. I want to wake without counting new bruises. I want my children to grow up thinking kindness is normal, and I want to stop flinching every time someone raises their voice." He turned toward her, his knee brushing hers beneath the blanket. "You've got all that here." She didn't answer at first, just watched the curve of his jaw in the half-light. Then, steady, she said, "That's why I'm not planning to leave." He nodded slowly. When she reached for his hand, he didn't flinch or freeze. He just let her fingers settle with his, palm to palm. No rush, no claim, just the quiet fact of it. And in that stillness, with the night drawing in and the world hushed around them, something opened between them, not sudden, not loud, but sure. She leaned her head on his shoulder. He let it rest there. Neither spoke. Nothing needed saying. Not yet. The first frost came early. It crept in without warning, silvering the grass and catching in the edges of the split rail fence. Della woke to the cold sharpness in the air and the quiet hush of the world muffled beneath it. She wrapped an old wool coat around Vincent and carried him outside to see the way the frost turned the world pale. Vera followed with her arms tucked inside her sleeves. "Will the ground stay like this?" she asked, her voice small in the morning hush. "For a little while," Della said. "Then the snow will come." Xander had risen before the sky lightened, but not to the usual sound of the barn door or the pump creaking. Instead, Della found him kneeling in the garden, pulling what was left of the beans and wrapping the stalks into bundles. He looked up when she stepped closer. "Wasn't sure the frost would hit so deep," he said, brushing earth from his palms. "Could have warned us," she said, half smiling. "I guessed wrong. You don't guess often." He stood and stretched, then looked toward the cabin. "Children eat yet?" They had bread and apples. "Vera says the apples taste like they've been stewing in dirt. They've been sitting in the root cellar a week too long. I'll ride out tomorrow, see if the Rileys have any left on their trees." Della gathered the bundled stalks without being asked, tucking them under one arm. "You trust them? They keep to themselves, but they're decent. Their youngest lost a leg in the war. Still limps, but he runs the plow better than most men I've seen. You know everyone around here, only the ones worth knowing." Later, while Vera helped Vincent sew patches onto the scraps of an old quilt, Della joined Xander near the creek bed, where he was laying fresh stones into the bank to keep the runoff from chewing deeper. She knelt beside him and felt the cold leach through the knees of her skirt. "You ever think about building another room?" she asked. He didn't look up from the stone he was settling into place. "You needing space already?" "No." I was thinking if Vera gets much taller, her feet'll hang off the cot. He nodded once. I've got lumber stacked behind the barn. Wasn't sure if it'd be for a shed or another room. I can draw up the shape. You know how to do that, my father taught me. He wanted a son. Got me instead. Xander paused, then handed her a piece of chalk he pulled from his shirt pocket. There's a slate board behind the stove. Use it. She took the chalk without a word and stood. When she reached the porch, she paused, turning back. You always carry chalk. Only when I think someone might ask for it. That night, after the children had fallen asleep under the quilt they called the scrap blanket, Della sat at the table with the slate balanced across her knees. Her drawing was rough, but the measurements were solid. She'd kept the lines clean, used the width of the existing joists to guide the extension. She barely heard Xander come in. He poured 2 cups of water and set one beside her. You want the door on the east wall? He asked. She nodded once. The sun comes in strongest there in spring. He studied the lines. You place the bed near the stove. You think ahead. I've had to. He leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, watching her. You ever build something from the ground up? No. But I took apart a smokehouse once to keep the wood from rotting. You think you'd know what to do with a hammer and cut nails? I know enough to not hit my thumb. He smiled, not wide but real. That's already better than me the first time out. She set the slate down and met his eyes. You sure about all this? I wouldn't have asked you to stay if I wasn't. She watched him a long moment. You didn't ask. He stepped closer, slow and careful. Then I'll say it plain now. Stay, build what you need. Make this place yours. Her throat caught, not with fear, but with something deeper, something that said she hadn't been asked, not really, in a long time. I want to, she said. He reached for her hand, not to pull, not to claim, but to hold. She let him. I'll get the beams ready in the morning, he said. You'll need help. I know where to find it. She laid her head against his shoulder, and he didn't shift away. The fire crackled low behind them, the quiet of the house deep and certain. Outside, frost returned to the fields, but inside the warmth held. And it would. As long as they built it together. The beams went up solid, not quick but right. Xander cut each one himself, measuring twice, running the edge of his palm along the grain like he was making something meant to last. Della steadied the frame while he nailed in the crossbars, her grip sure despite the chill that lingered in the air. Vera stood watch with a basket of nails, and Vincent kept tally on a slate board, tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth as he counted in careful handwriting. The new room began to take shape with the slow certainty of something earned. I figure by the end of the week, we'll have the roof set, Xander said one afternoon as he wiped his brow with his sleeve. Della stepped back to look at the frame. It's good. It's better with you building it. She didn't answer right away, just ran her hand along the edge of the doorframe. You think it'll hold through winter? It'll hold longer than that. Inside the cabin, Vera was teaching Vincent a tune on a Jew's harp that Xander had given him from a box of things he said he didn't use enough. The off-key twanging rose and fell like birdsong, scattered and earnest, but not unpleasant. I've never had a room I helped build, Della said, softer now. You've got one now. That night they sat together on the porch with blankets wrapped around their shoulders, the children already asleep. The sky was darker than usual, the stars hiding behind low clouds that promised snow. Della leaned against him, her fingers curled around his. You ever think about what you want in 5 years? He took a long breath before answering. I want this roof to still stand. I want the children to be strong and loud and taller than me. I want you beside me when I wake up every day. I never thought I'd have that again. Her voice was nearly a whisper, not with someone who sees me whole. I see what you are, he said, and what you've carried, and what you could be with time and peace. She turned to face him. "And what do you think I could be?" He brushed a curl from her forehead, his hand steady. "Happy." The first snow came 2 days later, light and slow, draping the grass in a dusting that caught in the folds of the hills. Xander hauled in extra firewood, and Della hung quilts over the window frames to keep the warmth in. The children pressed their palms to the glass and watched the flakes spin and drift, their breath fogging the panes. The new room was framed and roofed, not yet sealed, but enough to hold a promise. They worked by lantern light in the evenings, Xander hammering, Della sanding down the rough edges of the plank walls. She found herself humming sometimes without meaning to, and when he caught her at it, he didn't say anything, just smiled like that alone was enough. On a morning when the frost glazed the porch steps, Xander brought in a small wooden box. He set it on the table and slid it toward her. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was a ring. Simple gold, no stone, a clean circle worn smooth by time. "It was my mother's," he said. "She wore it till the day she passed. My father never took another wife, said she was enough for a lifetime." Della looked up at him, her eyes shining. "You sure?" "I've never been more." She reached across the table and took his hand, pressing her fingers around his. "I want to be yours. You already are." They married in the clearing behind the barn, just the two of them, the children, and the Rileys who'd brought over a pie and a blessing. Vera wore a ribbon in her braid. Vincent held the ring in both hands like it was the most important thing he'd ever been trusted with. Xander said no vows, but what mattered just her name, and the words, "I will," spoken like truth. Della looked him in the eyes and said, "I choose you," and that was all. Winter settled in, slow and deep. The days shortened, the nights stretched long, but the cabin stayed warm. The new room held. Xander carved shelves into the wall for Vera's books and a hook for Vincent's harp. Della stitched curtains from an old flour sack and lined them with fleece. They didn't talk about the past. It was there but quiet now, like a trail long walked and left behind. The children grew, loud and bright, running through snowdrifts and tumbling over each other in front of the hearth. They called Xander Pa without being told to. He never corrected them. In the spring, Della planted carrots and beans in neat rows beside the cabin. Xander built her a bench under the cottonwood so she could sit in the shade come summer. One night, after the children had gone to sleep and the fire had burned down to coals, Della rested her head against his chest and whispered, "You gave me back things I didn't even know I'd lost." He kissed her temple. "You never lost them. You just needed room to remember." And she did. She remembered how to laugh without apology, how to rest without fear, how to love without shrinking. She remembered what it felt like to belong, and she never forgot again. Not for a single day, not for the rest of their lives.